So, 102 years after the original was made, we're reviewing the remake. Welcome to the HolmFront.
Let me.
Welcome to the HolmFront. I'm Tyler, your host, and as always, to my right is my overly artistic friend. I totally botched that, but Mitch, welcome.
Oh, it was
Thank you.
fine. I thought it was good.
Oh yeah, it was great. So we watched a movie last night, which came out on Christmas Day.
Yeah. So Merry Christmas. He apparently did a solo Christmas episode, but I didn't get a chance to say Merry Christmas.
I don't think anyone watched that one, so it's okay. It was my like Christmas movie recommends list, which no one cares about. So yeah, what did we watch?
We saw Nosferatu.
Yes, we did.
So it is a remake of the German expressionistic film from 1922. The film actually was in danger of being lost because obviously Germany was taking out a lot of its like film and art throughout. I'm botching all this.
World War II?
World War II, yes.
There it is.
So, but the film was, if I'm not mistaken, they had like multiple versions of the film that were all kind of damaged, and they were able to splice them together to like recreate the picture. So we still have it. You can actually watch the original on YouTube for free.
I think it's on Amazon Prime too, but YouTube.
Yeah, I mean it's in the public domain now. Right. But essentially, I think the context is really helpful for this movie because it follows the original like point for point exactly. And so the original is a silent film, so there's no dialogue. You have title cards.
For some reason, I think that the original is a little less explicit.
There is that, which we'll get to. But the premise of the film is it's the classic vampire story, but the filmmakers, they wanted to adapt Bram Stoker's novel Dracula.
Right.
They couldn't do that. They couldn't get the rights. So they decided to do it anyways. So they made a new vampire. And they called him Count Orlok instead, and then they just ran with it. And I think they actually got in trouble for copyright infringement.
Oh,
yeah,
weird.
Which is now all water under the bridge, and we're all glad that they did it anyways. But it's called Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror, and it very much is that because it's all just, imagery, very spooky movie. There's some really cool shots, especially utilizing shadows that have been kind of inspirational across all sorts of Gothic filmmaking. So that's like the original. And this remake is by, what is it, Robert Eggers? Eggers, yeah.
Eggers.
So you've seen a couple of his movies. I've only seen this one. This is my first entry with him.
What an introduction.
Yeah. But he did very much try to keep intact like the spirit of the original, but it's given clearly more modern sensibilities, which are very different than what they were in 1922. It seems like you want to address the elephant in the room right away.
No. I'm. I mean, you alluded to it, so I'm just like, yeah.
Well, I just wanted to lay out the lay of the land for everybody.
Yeah.
And actually, before we get into it, we should just say right off the bat: do you recommend the movie? Yes or no? I'll answer first because I think, an easy answer to this. Yes, I recommend. Also, it has basically every trigger warning in the book.
Yeah.
This is not, it's not going to pull any, it does not pull punches.
No.
It's not going to conceal anything. You're going to see it all. And if you know anything about what Dracula and vampires actually represent,
yeah,
it
doesn't hold back.
Nasty. It's some awful stuff.
Yeah.
And he's a monster. Count Orlok is a monster. He brings the vampire back into that context.
Yeah, that's a good question. So on an artistic level, I will say there's a lot about this movie that holds merit. And I think, you're making a point. It's an important film for a number of reasons, which we'll get into. And I think I could agree with those. So if you're asking me just on like a technical level, just as a film critic, which I am not, but if I'm looking at it from that lens, then yeah, I think I could recommend it. On a personal level, no. It's very dark. even for my standards, and like I like dark stuff. Like I typically have a pretty high tolerance for a lot of that stuff. Like one of the things my mom says is like, and if Tyler says it's dark, it's really dark. And I don't know what that standard technically is, but like
your mom's standards for dark are pretty low, I gotta say.
no, yeah, for sure. But she actually understands that I'm a lot more tolerant of that stuff, and so she understands that if I'm saying it, then she stays way far away from it.
Yeah, I agree with that though. This is a very dark film.
Yeah,
not
it's up
visually,
there. It's up
like,
there with
content.
some of the content wise. It's up there with some of the like darker stuff from Game of Thrones, which those were some of the ones that were like really pushing my boundaries as we're going through it. Because it's just like there's only so far you guys got to take this. Like my goodness, I don't need to see all this. So yeah, on a personal level, I probably wouldn't, but I understand. Like there's a lot there that is of merit from a filmmaker's perspective, from just kind of a respect of the source material perspective. Like it has a lot there. It did a really good job of blending the source material of Nosferatu and of Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah,
which
that
really
was
bled
really
through.
inventive.
Even for someone who hasn't read Bram Stoker, like I understand enough of the story to understand what references he was making and how he was bleeding the two together. So yeah, I think there's enough there to compliment, but I also think that's just a lot. So just keep that in mind. Like you will be seeing some stuff that's pretty disturbing.
Yeah, and I think the impact of it too, because interestingly enough, after the movie ended, we were talking about it. We saw it with a couple of folks, some friends, and your reaction, it seems, has not changed to the movie. My initial reaction, I was like, well, I just need some processing time. And then I woke up this morning, like I went home and I thought about it, and then when I woke up this morning, I just was like remembering like the final scene, and I was like, that was just so gross.
Yes,
that was just disgusting.
And
I had to take a shower right away, and I had to just like literally I had to take a shower, and I was like, I just need to think about something else for a while. I watched messed
SpongeBob
up
when I got home. So
what episode?
The first one, and then I fell asleep shortly after. It was the one where Squidward goes to a town full of his people, and he hates it, and he misses SpongeBob, so he leaves.
I've not seen that one. That sounds excellent.
Great. It's like I think in season 2. Anyway, okay, so let's focus on what was good. Let's start where we usually do. I'll go first.
Yeah.
Cinematography, incredible,
beautiful film. It will be up for best cinematography at the Oscars. It may even win.
It'll probably be up,
really good,
nominated for best picture, I would imagine.
I don't know about that. It's pretty edgy for their taste.
But they seem to really like him. Anyway, so
the critics really like him. The director we were looking up, like all of his movies, audiences are like 60%, maybe 70%. They're like, they seem to like this one a little bit better. They keep complaining that he's slow. They're like, it's just too slow. Which
is a horrible complaint.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Obviously, it's slow. It's based off a silent film. They're the slowest movies in the world. And then the critics, though, they're like 90% with him.
On
consistently.
Average,
and that's because he has a really good directorial eye. Like he shows you things in the movie that are like their driving force, either the theme or the plot or the character. It's purposefully done, and there's just such amazing framing. You know, when we were sitting down, you know, when you're in the theater and then you see the of the screen or whatever, that's because it's formatting to the aspect ratio of the film.
Yeah,
but in this, it never did that.
Oh,
it just sat there. Yeah. And I was like, whoa, we've got a hugely tall aspect ratio going, which is rare. But he used that space really effectively. There were so many shots where it just like the pillars of the castle or things like that just really came to life. And I just really enrapturing.
It's a very vibrant world throughout the whole movie.
Yeah.
On levels that you don't want them to be and levels that you do. So, and then my second point was the acting is very classical, and it does a mix. Like it's not all dramatic and ridiculous, but there's a lot of moments in there are very reminiscent of classical acting, like very stage play esque, and it comes across really well. It obviously it's an homage to the source material and it's an homage to classic movie making, and so it did a really good job there. It's very dramatic in a good way.
Yes.
I don't want to say like, it was just, because it's based on a film where they had to be very expressionistic.
Expressionistic.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because you can't use your voice, so you've got to use your face.
Yeah.
You got to use your movements, and so that's why you got a lot of those iconic shots, and
Yeah.
especially with Nosferatu is groundbreaking in Gothic horror. So this does a really good job of bringing Gothic horror back to what Gothic horror actually is, or was.
Yes.
And that's a good, so I like that stuff.
I'm gonna have a lot more to say about the subject of the Gothic as we go on to it, but yes, it's the Spark Notes.
Yeah, if you like Gothic horror, like this,
yes,
this will tickle your funny bone or fancy bone, whatever. It'll tickle your fancies. So this, the last point that I had specifically was, and I made this already, was just it was great in respecting the source material of Dracula and Nosferatu.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, for someone, and I have not seen the original Nosferatu. I've seen enough of it, all like the iconic shots.
Yeah.
And then enough of Dracula. I know that I was understanding all the references he was making. So I'm sure there's plenty there, even more so for those who understand all the source material a lot deeper than I do. But even for someone who doesn't, I could tell what he was doing. It was like, oh, okay. I like that. I like that he was actually not trying to make it his own. He was doing something very respectful. So there's those.
Yeah, I think those are all strong points. I agree with all that. I also was thinking too, 102 years later, it's probably the most justifiable film to get a remake because it offers insight into what has changed over a century.
I love that this is the one that lasted though, because it's so funny. Its existence is so weird in the first place.
Yeah,
because Dracula, pretty famous novel even back then.
Yeah,
and then for them not to be able to get the rights, but then we're just like, whatever, I'm gonna make it anyway. We'll just give it a different name. Because it is extremely close. It is parallel to Bram Stoker's Joker, or Dracula. And then, like I said, he does a lot more to kind of run those lines closer. But the fact that it exists, and this is the one that has lasted despite its difficulties with the rights, and then this is the one that gets the remake, that's funny.
Yeah,
a lot of hoops.
Well, and it's fascinating too the ways in which it's reminiscent of the original, but also just of that era.
Yeah.
So, for example, is it Lily Rose Depp? That's the lead actress's name, I think.
I don't know.
I think it's Johnny Depp's daughter, if I'm not mistaken.
That's news to me.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was her.
Oh, I'm gonna pull this up now. I want to know.
Yeah. Well, just scroll down. You'll see it. And so she looks a lot like Jeanette Gaynor in the film.
That is Johnny Depp's daughter. I did not know that.
Yeah, and Jeanette Gaynor, if you don't know who she is, she was a silent film actress. She's the first woman to win Best Actress at the Oscars, and she won it for the films Sunrise and Seventh Heaven. And Sunrise is a film, it won the most artistic picture that year, which is a category they've no longer done. But that movie was directed by Murnau, who was the same guy who made Nosferatu. Oh. So, not to say that Jeanette Gaynor was not in Nosferatu or anything.
I mean,
yeah. Well, I'm just saying he was looking at the era is what my impression was, because the emphasis on the way they did her hair and her just
her general
she
style,
had that it was very much that innocent look that Jeanette Gaynor had. It was the same kind of vibe. So I felt like there was a real effort to kind of pull that era back into this is sort of what it felt like to watch a symphony of horror in 1922. You know what I mean? To them, this would have been the level of intensity. But for us, we have 100 years worth of films that we've seen in the interim. And a lot of them have done all kinds of crazy stuff. We've allowed all sorts of things put to media.
Right.
So it's an interest. It almost becomes a commentary just inevitably because there's this huge gap of time. And it's just kind of well, here's our movies look like now. So I thought on an artistic level, that was a really fascinating depiction.
It was almost like a window into a window.
Yes.
From our perspective, looking into their perspective. So I said, I mean, that argument is very interesting just because of how it tells a story, outside of the film.
Yeah.
To kind of give you an idea of what it was like back then.
It is.
Like I said, I understand the importance, and I agree with that.
Well, yeah, and it is a testament to the filmmakers too. I don't want to just say just because it was made, it gets this honor. It's because it was made so well that it can get that honor.
True.
Because, silent pictures, you're working with the visual medium, right? So it's all about how you set up the shot and where you position the camera. That stuff is so unbelievably important because you just have less tools that we have nowadays we use all the time. So his emphasis to go back to that and be like, this is about like setting up the shots and creating a mood and establishing a presence, and the kind of like the aesthetics of filmmaking takes center stage. He cranks that way up, and he does such a good execution of it. Everybody does. And he's free to utilize contemporary filmmaking like dialogue and more realistic acting, these kinds of things. Like he can use all of those tools as well. He's not afraid of them, but he also doesn't let them overpower the important sentiment of bringing that through line in. Like one of the best shots in the whole thing or sequences is when he gets on the carriage and it's just this immaculate like forest scene.
Oh yeah.
And the road goes down into the shape of a cross and he's like walking down it. It was just like literally breathtaking. Just one of the most breathtaking movies I think I've ever seen. It was just wow. So
movies or shots?
Well, I mean, that was just one shot, but
That's
I could
fair.
pick apart just the whole movie and do that,
Yeah, whoever's a cinematographer is brilliant.
A genius.
Yeah. Yeah, that shot was rather remarkable. I remember sitting there and being like, wow, he's really flexing here. Because you can tell, like, they put a lot of time and effort into making this look very specific.
Yeah.
And like I said, the look of the film throughout is pretty impressive.
Mm.
On multiple levels, like on a technical level for cinematography, and then just in its homage that it pays to Gothic horror and the way they set things up and the way that it kind of runs, the way that it kind of drives itself with the characters. It's remarkable. I don't know how else you would describe that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I guess my final points on the totally good column was that, again, that evil is evil again. I appreciated that they didn't try
for what it's worth,
to make him something different. Not that like, I don't know. It's not that you can't have like Dracula be a sympathetic character in a storyline or whatever, but I just feel like nowadays, especially a lot of millennial writing, which I'm allowed to say whatever I want about millennials because I am the definitive millennial. No one
age-wise, yes.
Age-wise, I am exactly millennial. There's no chance. I can't be argued whether I'm like, well, maybe you're before or after, or maybe you're a little mixed. No.
You're like dead in the middle.
I am millennial. And this is like, millennial writing is all about trying to like, well, let's see the other side.
It's always tragic backstory and trying to understand what made him this
What are the
way.
intentions?
Like,
what are the drives? And
I
that's
don't know, he's
good.
sucking people's bloods out. Do we need to understand what, like, he's bad. He's doing bad things.
Right. Well, and I don't have a problem. I like that stuff, obviously. And millennials like that stuff, and there's a good validity to that because, you're trying to understand characters on a deeper level. Like, millennials like to get at, like, the heart of what's going on.
Sure.
The thing in this case is that Count Orlok and the whole concept of the vampire, this original version of it it's pure evil incarnate,
evil,
basically. Yeah. So the concept takes precedence. So in this movie, a lot of things that you would expect to see happen in like a good movie are kind of not there because it's more important to elevate the original aesthetic ideals, right?
Okay.
It's like it's a depiction of evil. This is what evil looks like. So that's where the honesty comes in. Not about like its complexity of character because it's like there was no complexity of character. This was just horror, and that's what it looks like. So there's a real kind of, I guess, sincerity to that.
Yeah, that's fair. Was that your final point on the good?
Yeah, I mean, just that if I could add maybe one more thing without taking up too much time.
Yeah, go for it. What's up?
So like nowadays to have diversity of thought isn't really that unique of a perspective anymore because you get commentaries and you get movies and you get art all the time. So I actually scroll back up a little bit. What did I say? I said, so to measure art is not to consider not only the actions and intentions of the artist, but also to consider the unconscious context that exists as a result of culture and time. So I guess to kind of like put a, cap on that whole process is I think it'll be interesting if in 100 years people look back to this movie, because you have to wonder what's going to last 100 years. Sure. That's some serious punishment that most movies cannot withstand. Most art can't withstand. And the only reason why the original is noteworthy at all is just because it exists. And I mean, like, there's
that
not
it made
to,
it.
yeah, that it made it basically,
Sure.
and not to be dismissive of it because it is a good film. But I'm just also commenting on the fact that like it's at a time period where you just don't have that many examples. So it's one of the earliest examples just of like a feature film horror at all ever. So obviously it's important just for like record's sake. But art's always supposed to like be emblematic of something. So you could argue, for example, that maybe and I'm just spitballing, I don't know this specifically, but you could argue that the original movie is all about home invasions and that this is a fear representative of like the things that Germans would have felt in the 1920s. I don't know if that's the case at all. I'm just saying that's potentially a lens. That's often what great art will do, is that because it's so representative of how the people felt, to the society felt at that time,
that it bleeds through into the narrative. Yeah,
that it bleeds through into the narrative, and that if it's done well, it will actually kind of give us something to think about, and it will resonate with us so strongly that then it pervades throughout time, and we go back and revisit it.
It becomes timeless in the way that it pervades a thought or feeling that is current to when it's made.
Right.
Which this one does too.
That's the question, yeah, which we can only guess at right now.
Sure.
We will have to wait and see what time does to it. If I was to take a quick guess, though, if it will stand the test of time, I feel like it should.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it has...
It's doing a lot of different things. So
yeah.
I can see like it would take time and reflection. Yeah, to kind of give it a context. So yeah, I guess 10 years would kind of give you a broader scope.
10 years is good to kind of check in and see how it's coming along.
Yeah, which is why you can tell that Last Jedi is not good. So did you want to move on, or
yeah,
you
let's
still have
move
more
on.
that? Okay.
So let me throw it to you because I've been talking a lot. I've been doing all this kind of abstract art things. Let's get back to the film. So why is like the level of dark, mature subject matter just a problem for like you, and like how much are you willing to like forgive? Like, I don't know, or do you have an example of like, okay, this is a scene that went way too far, do it this way and you get more or less the same effect? We're going to get into some spoilers, but I don't think we're intending to spoil the whole movie.
No. I do want to keep it as abstract as possible. I think I'll give a couple of specific examples of where it goes a little dark. That was like beyond my so I'll give you this one because this is a rule that kind of, this is like a hard line for me.
Okay.
And it's ruined a couple of things. Like, for instance, one of the examples that I cite consistently is Walking Dead. The first 5 minutes of that or that show, Rick Grimes, and I understand why they did it. I get it. I understand the communication that you're giving me. But the first thing he does is come out and shoot a little girl. And I was like...
She's a zombie, by the way.
Right, but yes. it like goes the whole way. You see everything. And I'm like... Yeah. I mean, the show could have proven itself without having to like give me this right up off the bat. Like, I almost stopped watching the show because of that. And then the other one is Hereditary, which that one was rough. Like, just stop killing kids. I don't need to see it. I get like if it happens, but the fact that you have to like give me all the detail, I don't like that. So this one does that. And it's really horrific. Like, it was just rough. Because they do a lot of lead up to it, where it's two little girls, and they are both like really scared about being alone, and the father is constantly comforting them, saying, "I'm never gonna let anything happen to you." And then the mom says the same thing, and she's pregnant, and then Nosferatu comes in and doesn't let the dad wake up. He like casts a spell on him or something. Yeah. He goes in and he sucks the little girls dry, and then he butchers the mom who's pregnant, like I said, and it's just like, and then you see it all, and I'm like,
you don't see anything with regards to the mom.
No, true.
Or I suppose not in that scene anyways.
Right. Yeah, right. Well, then, yeah, that's my second point there. So yeah, and you made a point that I hesitate to say justifies because it was just so freaking dark. This dad goes crazy. Justifiably so. He wakes up to his whole family dead.
Yeah, you're totally in this full spoilers, so forget what I said earlier.
That's fair. Well, like it's hard not to like give that one away because these are the two that were like just. Wah.
Yeah.
It was, and there's one at the end too. I won't go into that one because that one actually, is a little more justified to me for the film itself. Like it's still really dark and it's disgusting. But
are you talking about the end scene?
Yeah.
Okay.
But this one, it basically implies necrophilia, and I was like,
yeah. Well, it didn't show it. It implied
it was close enough. It was enough. And you made a point that potentially that this is showing like how this evil could be created or something. Maybe that's the case. Maybe it's not. I'm not really sure. There's stuff in the movie that like leads you to potentially believe that.
Yeah, well, because they never explained where Count Orlok came from.
And it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. But I thought potentially that was it because the whole they did say something about how he's like they reference him as like a demon, but they also talked a little bit about how like Satan can sort of have like a version of himself manifest in reality.
He gave you a couple of them. He threw a couple of them out there for you kind of
some theories, yeah. But that one seemed kind of interesting to me. It was sort of like it's just unearthing raw evil darkness, and then it kind of got conflated with what used to be a human being, but is really just a corpse. And that's how you get the vampire. And I thought that was a well-chosen way to put it because it did represent Orlok as a character who's just, again, that raw evil. And when we say evil, like, it's like you're killing kids, you're possessing people, distorting reality for them. It's like these are really, really disgusting like invasions of like personal like autonomy and things like that. A lot of those issues are coming up. This is also like the biggest trigger warning I would say is like, because you're basically following a rape victim throughout the movie,
kind of,
on some level, and it's kind of it's rough, like because it's like it's so like. I'll stop talking. You go back to your point, but I just because I don't. I feel like I made the point. It's just so dark, but that's what evil looks like.
It's not necessarily gratuitous in its like it does have some gratuity for sure. It's not like over the top detail wise, I guess, but it does. Yeah. The movie's very oppressive in getting its point across, and so you're just kind of carrying that weight around the whole thing, and then the end, it does feel like you got to go take a shower. You're just like, bleh.
Yeah.
So and that may have been potentially part of my expectations. Like I know enough about Eggers to kind of understand that it was going to be different than I was expecting. But I was thinking he was going to go a little bit more traditional with the vampire arc rather than using the vampire to portray these ideas and kind of embody them.
What do you mean by traditional?
More like a traditional Dracula story where he's just kind of running rampage and he's going after Millie or Minnie or whatever the original character's name is. Because this one seems a lot more focused on the sexual aspect of that stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas Dracula is just kind of obsessed and he thinks that this wife is her reincarnated essentially, so he doesn't care what gets in his way. He's going to get to her. Well, and I understand that has some connotations, but this one was like taking those connotations. He's like, no. This is what it means. And it was like, no, there's no interpretation in here. Like, this is it.
Well, it's kind of, I think it does work because Bram Stoker's Dracula is very sexual. It's just super subliminal.
It's also like more appealing, I guess.
Because it's all shrouded in symbolism, basically. None of it's overt in the novel as far as I know.
This one's very overt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like I said, I understand what it's saying, and I understand like it's embodied that pretty well, but I experienced that, and I didn't like it at all.
Well, because without the gravitas of Dracula, if you just go to Orlok, it's like this guy's just he's just an animal.
Yeah.
So there's none of the dialogue. I mean, he has dialogue, but it's Orlok. Orlok has to conduct himself in a way that he thinks will convince humans enough. And when they start to catch on, then he has to cast a spell on them to control them or bite them so he can get leverage over them. Those are his tactics because he's not human and he doesn't think like a human.
Right.
So he just says the words that he thinks will get them to react in the way that he wants.
Or to get what he wants out of them, yeah.
Right. And when that is not working very well, then he goes into just his primal force and just force it out of them.
Yeah.
But you can see how that's less attractive than like the Dracula, the suave debonair with the goblet or whatever, the chalice. And what is a man? A miserable pile of secrets.
That's fair. Yeah, it's not the classic Bela Lugosi. I'm here to suck your blood.
Yeah, it's not that Dracula.
It's definitely like the one. So yeah, so that's my sensibilities, if you will.
Yeah,
this is not my style. Clearly, this is outside of my realm of comfort. This is outside of, and like I enjoy horror movies. Like this is less so than I used to, but this is this. Like I used to just kind of put them on. Like I didn't care. This one was like, it was going for shock, and it was shocking. So yeah, I think that was my point with the dark. And the last point that I had was just, it seemed like it was throwing a lot of nudity around that wasn't necessary. It was just kind of like, did we need to like have that here? And that's just a personal thing. Like, there's very few instances where we went over a segment about this, and so like you can see our thoughts.
Was that in our Craven?
That was in the Craven episode, which I have a point on that, by the way, in this film.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't see it was justified, and I don't see most nudity as justified in films, and that's more me on a moral level. Like I understand artistically it has merit and value and stuff. Yeah. I don't know what else to put there because it was just kind of a nitpick, and it's a very minor point considering all the other stuff.
Well, I'm kind of with you. I do think the nudity. I think it would have been better had they scaled back. I understand why in the last scene you couldn't do that. I mean, you could have, but I think it added to the disgusting nature of that final scene by having the nudity there.
Right.
But the ones before that, I think, should have not been there because then it would have made that end scene that much more like shocking and like.
Even though it was enough to just be rough, I was man.
Because I think they started to normalize the nudity
throughout
the movie, and I didn't think that was the right.
It
call
decreased
for
its merit. That's
fair. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so all right, so those are my points. What did you find? I hesitate to say bad, but what did you disagree with? I guess in the film.
Well, so I didn't write down any of the things you mentioned, but that's mostly because I guess I'm more mixed on them.
Right, because you're trying to look at it more like of its artistic value within this property, within its context.
Yeah, well, and I'm trying to be appreciative, I guess, or respectful of the fact that given the subject matter, I don't really like things sugar-coated. I mean, I'm a millennial, so I don't really like the sugar-coating. So I appreciate that it's just kind of depicted like these are the horrible things that he does. I do think I got to see more than I probably needed, certainly more than I wanted.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
this is a tough movie.
Yeah,
it's very tough. It's not one of those you can just say, yeah, it was really good, go watch it. It's one of those you're like, beware of what you're going to step into because it's a lot.
I'm still processing mode, so I have not come to a conclusion on the movie, but that is a very strong point in its favor, which is why I'm not against
going either way.
Yeah, because usually if you've left me to process and think about it, then you're doing something right. And also too, the like the horror what was I going to say? The kind of excessive like gratuityness of it. For a lot of contemporary horror movies, right? There was like a comment somebody said where they were like, "Oh, it just wasn't like not enough blood and gore for me." What?
It's a dumb comment. it didn't need blood and gore. This wasn't about blood and gore.
But it was fascinating to see someone say that.
Yeah.
Because when they said that, it's sort of going back to like the Gothic. The concept of the Gothic is not just, chapels and, full moons and things like that. It's just that those things were taboo to even discuss at the time.
Yeah.
Like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that classic story, is considered Gothic because the idea, the audacity that someone could do despicable things. They could be impolite. They could have a secret self that's not the outward appearance they project. What?
Say it isn't so.
Yeah, the posh British society. That's who Robert Louis Stevenson was attacking. He's like, you're all a bunch of fakers.
Right.
Like underneath
You're
it,
unwilling
people
to
are
admit
sick.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's similar to like Oscar Wilde with the picture in Dorian Gray. He's like, no, this man's a narcissist. He's horrible. He's a monster.
Right.
But everybody is okay with it because outwardly, look how attractive he is. So the concept of the Gothic is to sort of unearth the horrible gratuity and make us
shed light on it.
Yeah, shed light on it.
Gotcha.
There's actually an interesting scene in this movie where they catch this mentally deranged character who's really under Orlok's spell, and they lock him up in a dungeon. And the guy who runs the sanitarium or whatever, he's like, well, why'd you lock him in the dungeon? And and he didn't say it in the movie, but I wished he would have. I wish he would have said, well, you should bring him upstairs where there's like sunlight and stuff like that. Because that would have been a perfect representation of what the film was doing. Is like, you can't just lock up all these dark secrets in a cell and expect it to just go away.
Right.
You're going to need to go down there and pull it out. And when you pull it out into the sunlight, it reveals it and you've got to see it, but then it also destroys it. So I thought that was kind of, and symbolically that is what, I mean, I don't think I'm spoiling anything with that, because I mean, that's like vampires, they die in sunlight.
It's Vampire 101, yeah.
Yeah, Vampire 101, exactly. I mean, that comes from this movie
Sure.
in a lot of ways. So, yeah, okay, so that was kind of like my Gothic take, which is just a lot of stuff I learned in that MFA program. It was a really interesting conversation when we were talking about the Gothic, and I'm always like, I guess like, so, because the movie is in this tug of war, I think, between like silent picture horror filmmaking and like Gothic art house cinema. But then there's also like this gray area between the two, which is just, are you just being gratuitous horror schlock?
Yeah.
And
it's hard to tell.
It's hard to tell.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why there's not a specific consensus of whether the movie is good or bad. It's more of a, I don't really know.
Yeah, that's why my default was like, I'm just taking a step back. I'm not even going to say if it's good or bad.
Sure.
I'm more like looking at this going, is this going to be a true Gothic picture? Because if it is, that standard's enormously high. It definitely has the shock factor, but did it go too far? And it's weird when there's people around us who feel like it didn't even go far enough. I'm like,
well, the
sheesh.
thing, yeah, because we were reading a couple of those, which
how much more did you need? Like, this was dark.
They were specific in what they wanted. They're like, well, I saw a horror movie. Why isn't it gory? It's like, okay, you have a low standard, my sir, because this was enough. I mean, it was enough to get under your skin without having to like be pulling people's hearts out and stuff. So it depends on what you mean by what or what you want from a given horror film. Yeah. But also, like, you have to understand that it's contextualized within not only Gothic horror, the fact that it's pulling on classic Gothic horror, so it's trying to bridge that gap as well. And also, it's being made by Robert Eggers, which is, he's a very specific style and way of going about things. Which it's at times 11 in this movie for sure. But I mean, it's clearly like he's very art house kind of more. I mean, and I appreciate the fact that he's going about certain concepts and subject matter in a more abstract way to give it this light, or not in this case. But it's he's a way of trying to portray an idea in a non-conventional manner, which is what he did with Northman, because that's a classic hero's journey story, which I know you haven't seen that one, but
okay, sounds like I'd like it.
You probably would. Yeah, again, it's very abstract, kind of art house feel to it, and it's very unconventional in its methods. So, like, I understand why critics like him, because he pushes a lot of boundaries and he tries telling it in new ways and that kind of thing. So, like, all that stuff is good, but then there's points where you're like, did you need to? And I think this movie embodied that pretty well, because there's a lot of points in there where you're in the movie and after the movie, you're like, did we really need to go all the way there? So, yeah, I mean,
Which is exactly what people felt about Dorian Gray and
right.
the Bram Stoker novel when they came out,
Which
which
is
is why
which is a broader discussion of like
yeah,
art is representative of culture and reality, or it's supposed to be.
yeah,
And so if that's the case, how much should it, or to what extent should it go? And
yeah,
I think that there's something to be said on a more objective level, and I think there's something to be said on a more moral level, and sometimes they coalesce.
yeah.
So if you're looking at it more moralistically, there's a lot of evil in this movie, like a lot of really evil stuff. And yeah, if you don't want to be exposed to that, don't watch it.
Yeah, to kind of go to that point, I think now the Gothic it's like, what's our Gothic is kind of the question, right?
Sure.
Because when it depicts the gratuitous violence and nudity and stuff, and you have people reacting in such a way as they don't think that's gratuitous enough, it seems like it sort of doesn't work, right? It seems like that's not really unearthing the Gothic, because it would be something that's too taboo for us to talk about.
Sure.
But at the same time, Gothic is also just representative of an era, and I don't know that it's really necessary or even possible to recreate. I think that's open for debate.
Yeah.
What I can say, though, is that the film was, when we say it's like respectful to the source material and like the themes of which it was trying to unearth, it was a depiction that could not be done at the time. For multiple reasons: technology, societal perception, etc. But nowadays we can, and so now it's sort of been depicted in the kind of earnest sincerity that the original filmmakers always intended, but were not able to go to. So there's kind of I guess
there might be an argument that it's more purely Gothic.
Yeah. So you could see how this is.
But then
this
again,
tug of war is
if
really
it's not being restrained, then is it taboo, and therefore is it Gothic?
I don't know.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, here's another one. Let's talk about another genre. We'll talk about romanticism and realism, right?
Okay.
So in this movie, the characters don't always act realistically.
No.
There's one scene in particular that stood out to me. So like, you have the wife who's left behind, and the husband goes on this like 6-month journey. I think it's 3 months there, 3 months back, to go visit Count Orlok to help him sign off on this title, that's deed, so he can move into the city. And he doesn't know, obviously, that he's a vampire. But he leaves his wife behind, and she suffers from these horrible night terrors. And he's pretty dismissive of them. I mean, he loves her, but he's also like, you need to put this behind you. It's, whatever. It's not like real.
His point was that the doctors have told you that engaging in these conversations is bringing it further to light, and therefore it will exasperate them. So he tries to push it aside. So
Right.
like, it had a reason.
Yeah.
But
Well, it's classic, the feminine hysteria that
Right.
just nobody gave any credibility to, hysteria. But so she stays with their friends or his cousin or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's her friend, and then her husband is the one who owns the house, obviously. But I think it's her friend.
It's her friend.
Yeah.
Okay. So so she stays with them, and while she's there, the night terrors come back, and they're much, much worse. And since he's been gone, she's struggling tremendously, because he was kind of like a rock for her, as she describes. Seems like the night terrors severely lessened once she was
Married to him. Yeah.
Married to him. Yeah.
Thomas is his
With
name.
Thomas. Yeah. So when she's there, what's his name? The man of the house, he doesn't get it, and he doesn't know what to do. And she's walking around at night, and she's, like convulsing and doing these weird like things, and he's just kind of freaking out. And so he gets a doctor to try to help her, and they like tie her to her bed, and they, give her anesthesia to knock her out or whatever.
I don't think it's anesthesia. I think he's just chloroforming the
Or
chick.
chloroform.
It's just like
Yeah.
just like,
So
that'll
they're
solve
trying
it.
to keep her like subdued. Basically, they're draining her blood. They're doing all these horrible things you shouldn't be doing. But like, given the context of the time
These
the
are what
movie.
were medically acceptable. Yeah.
Yeah, it was medically acceptable. And then they bring it. Then the doctor's just like, "Psh, this isn't working. This is crazy. I don't know what to do. So I got this friend we could enlist. He's my old professor, kind of a wackadoo guy, but I mean,
Maybe.
broke a clock's right twice a day, so we could ask him. So he goes and gets William Dafoe. And when he brings in William Dafoe, Defoe's just like, don't tie her up, don't do this stuff. He's like, you're all wrong. No chloroform, none of this. And he's like, she's being possessed by something. And he has this scene where he's like, you'll forgive the grotesque explanation, but it's like while she's under a trance, he's got to like injure her. But he stabs. He just like straight up stabs like right where her artery is. He's like, see, she's not waking up. She's not reacting.
He's got like this 6-inch needle he just like shoves in there. Oh, I don't know if this is the way we're gonna fix it. But
it's like maybe you could just do like a little scratch or something.
No. Stab her in the heart. That'll
pull out a little hair. Like, see, she didn't react to that. Anyways,
it was a dramatic. Yeah, I mean, it was part of the movie, right? Everything was overly dramatic with its symbolism.
Yeah.
Here.
So anyways, that's just a side
par for the course.
Part that's funny, but so he goes and he sits down and he talks to her and he's like, well, tell me your ailments or whatever. And then she just tells him everything. And I was like, okay, so she's been going like 3 months.
No, more.
Probably more. And she even tells the man of the house later, I forget his name, so I was just calling him that, the Graven guy, who can act, apparently.
Yeah, so as an aside, let's jump in that real quick. His name is Aaron Taylor. What is it? Aaron Taylor Johnson.
Okay.
Okay. This man couldn't act to save his life in Craven.
No.
I don't know what it is. I'd love to study this guy. I just want to sit down and pick his brain. In Craven, terrible. He was just this.
It's Razzie material.
Razzie material.
Well, the Razzies, they pick the worst movies of the year.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, clearly he looks good. He had like really great physique and stuff, but that was like all they focused on. They're like, that we don't want your personality in here at all. So you kill it, and then you show up as Craven. Didn't show up at all. It just was like, this guy's terrible. But then he shows up in this movie, and he's actually delivering lines and stuff.
Yeah,
I
he
was like,
great.
Cool. What happened, man? they lobotomized you before they jumped into Craven? It was just weird. But yeah, he's in this movie, and he does a good job. So
yeah.
Well done, Aaron Taylor, whatever your name is. Like,
I don't understand it. All I can say is better director.
Yeah,
because the director will tell you if what you did does not match.
That's got to be it. I mean,
yeah.
Regardless, but yes, he's and his name is Aaron Taylor Johnson. We'll just call him that because I can't remember his name in the movie. He's the one with whom, I guess she's the main protagonist.
Ellen, yeah, she's staying with.
She stays with them while Thomas is gone.
Yeah.
Is it actually Transylvania in the movie?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
they
just basically ripped everything off except Dracula's name. That's hilarious. So he actually goes to Transylvania. I couldn't figure it out if like that was actually Transylvania.
I'm pretty sure
they still have all the accents and everything. I was like,
yep.
Man, all right, this is called plagiarism.
Yeah.
So yeah, when he's there, she's with Aaron Taylor.
Yeah.
And then his wife and his 2 daughters are the ones there.
Yeah. Well, my point was that she tells him that like she has this one offhanded comment because they're bickering about the credibility of what she's suffering from. He thinks she just has some illness. And
one of them is coming at it pragmatically and as a doctor, but he also is the one that brought in Willem Dafoe. And Willem Dafoe, he described him as an alchemist and kind of a spiritualist.
Yeah.
So he's coming at it from a very different angle and trying to solve that problem because it's not working, all the medical advancements that they're using, because she's been going through it for years. I mean, since she was a kid, essentially, because it shows in the beginning of the movie that this is where she starts as a young teenager, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But then all the way up until this point, so he's like, well, clearly what you're doing is not working, so I'm going to do something different. Right. He also shows himself to be credible in certain ways, but to certain characters. So he does it with Aaron Taylor and with the doctor character. He does not prove it to Ellen, where your point was going was that he doesn't prove himself worthy of trust, the trust that she gives him immediately. Then again, I mean, it can be explained away by the desperation that she feels, and she's like kind of at her wit's end and stuff. So that's where I kind of gave it a pass in the movie, but you're right, there wasn't enough there where he's like shown her that I am different than, the 30 other doctors you probably told this story to.
Right.
So,
Right, because
for what it's worth.
Yeah, because I felt like, if I had told someone my physical ailments and they've treated me this way, where they're tying me up and stuff,
I
like,
don't want another one of you.
yeah, exactly.
What are you gonna do?
So I thought she would be more like resistant, and that was an opportunity for William Dafoe to kind of give us, an audience, as well as her, his perspective on things.
Right.
And that would have really validated, and then she could have opened up. And now I agree that, like, this is where it goes back to, like, ooh, here's my little justification for you. I'm really coming from a silent picture art house film, so I don't need to do that.
Sure.
And I'm representing
I've already
the
given
era.
you more than you should have gotten.
Yeah, and it's like in the era too, like, women would have just told everything because that's what they have to do. That's what's expected of them.
Yeah, man walked in the room, so
right,
you
exactly.
give him what he wants.
But, like, either way, I just felt like that was an instance where I might have been like, let's do a rule break then, and let's do something more contemporary, because I think it's going to be very beneficial. Because my other sort of qualm with the movie is I felt like William Dafoe needed to be our moral compass, or at the very least our wise sage in the movie, and he's not really that. He actually doesn't know that much about Nosferatu specifically. He figures out that it's Nosferatu, and that's what we're dealing with.
He's just the one that's equipped enough to figure it out, rather than the one who knows, which I'm fine with because I don't need some exposition dumb character. But also, yeah, you're right. He didn't fulfill the roles that he could have.
Yeah,
whether or not should have is the word you should use, but
because the whole thing is he has like this political pushback against modern science,
right?
And I thought that was really interesting. But when he does that, he just creates especially in our contemporary time. But, like, he creates this void where you're sort of wondering, what are we going to fill that with? If not modern science, then what? And you can't
just leaves it there.
Yeah, he just leaves it there. And you can't just say, like, the occult or whatever, because it's like, well, this is the evil stuff that you're attacking.
Right.
So there must be something that addresses it.
It's at that moment that he jumps from the Nosferatu character to the more Van Helsing character.
Yeah.
And so he kind of takes on that role and leaves the void behind, and so it kind of feels like you're left wanting from him specifically, because he fills his position. I mean, it's Willem Dafoe. Like, what do you want? He's gonna do it well.
Yeah.
It's just I guess on the narrative perspective, maybe they didn't give enough room or enough material, or maybe they didn't allow him to go that way.
I needed to push him a little bit,
right,
to his character to do some other things, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like I mean, if you think about it this way, the context of the modern medicine is going to say there's health and then there's illness, right? But just as there is holy and unholy, right? So he needed to kind of explore.
He needed to be the bridge between the two.
Yes,
because they had the contrast. They had the doctor, and then they had him, who was kind of acknowledging the holy and unholy.
Yeah,
but then there was nothing there once the acknowledgement was made. Because it was like they were running parallel, and then he made a discovery, and then they branch.
Yeah.
And he just runs off with the holy and unholy argument. And so, like I said, he doesn't provide a bridge for those who may have been on the pragmatic side. Yeah, I mean, again, as a more minor point, because he does deliver on what he has, and he does do a really good job of what he's got. But to continue aiding the audience with this more gothic take, especially because it's more classical, especially with some of the subject material, like, it would have been more helpful to have him fill more roles.
I was just thinking, like, what if he, like, told her a story? If he said, like, when I was a boy, like, my father took me on a hunting trip or something, not to go back to Craven, but but you know what I'm saying?
Russell Crowe just shows up.
But you get what I'm saying, right? Like, he could have done it through, like, a story format, and then that would have convinced her, and then we would have gotten this weird, interesting parallel of something that we could have used to kind of filter through some of this other stuff. Like, again, like, see, I'm having to do, this is like the second time now that I'm having to do what I think the film should have done on its own, where I have to kind of fill in those gaps of like sunlight and,
missed opportunities.
However, I did get there. So how do I know that
That he wasn't the one that pushed you along the road.
Right, that he didn't give me enough materials, and it wasn't that hard. It didn't take that long. It's just only the day after.
Right.
So it's not like I needed 10 years of study on this film to receive its genius.
This is
I got it.
12 hours or what? Not even.
Yeah. So that's what's kind of yeah, so I don't know. And then, but my last, because believe it or not, this is part of the subsection of things I didn't like as much in the movie. The last one is, even though I liked the music overall, a lot of the music, especially in the early parts, was just like that, like horror, and I just kind of,
Yeah, it's the violins going crazy.
it
felt a little generic. It didn't feel like it would have been.
It just becomes white noise.
It would have been really neat to have someone like Hans Zimmer, what he did with Dune, really go all out with making something specific for this.
Mm-hmm.
It's not bad. It's not a bad soundtrack. It
No.
it wasn't as.
He just needed to tone it down and stop trying to push that horror agenda and go, like, you focus on symphony and let Edgar's focus on horror, and you'll make a symphony of horror. That's what I felt they should have done.
That's fair.
He was well chosen, the composer, and it was a good score. It's just kind of, there was just too much of the
There was enough
stuff.
material there to justify something less generic.
Yeah.
Overall. Okay. Well, let's go into noteworthy bits.
Okay.
And we're almost at an hour, so I think we can call it pretty soon because we don't want to give too much more spoiler material. I know I've given enough, but
I mean, there's still a lot more in the movie, honestly.
There is.
I mean, and just to watch it, like, if like you're better prepared, I think this is a good excuse to have some spoilers, just because I think it's a movie that it is better to be prepared for than to just, unless you're just like, sure, whatever, more blood.
Well, unless you're like that guy who was like, this isn't as gory as I wanted to be. Like, dude, come on, man, be more thoughtful, please.
Okay, so what were some noteworthy bits?
So I liked the hand over the city. So there's a scene where he reaches kind of towards a window, and he's reaching for Ellen's character, and he's given her a certain amount of time for certain things. But he's spreading a plague, which is kind of a commentary on both times, actually.
Yeah.
Because it comments on the Black Plague, but it also kind of alludes to some of the things that are more modern. Probably COVID, or just that type of mentality that goes with it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's giving that concept, that evil, if you will, an embodiment, and that's him.
Yeah.
And so that was an interesting commentary. But they do that pretty interestingly on a visual level when he reaches out the window and his shadow kind of goes over the entire city. I think it's London or something. But it just kind of creeps through the streets and over the buildings and things. And it was a very interesting way of showing that visually. I just thought it was a treat. It was cool that because it's super classical for one, like it's very reminiscent of classic film.
Yeah.
But it also is very visually interesting.
I also think shadows are a really fascinating concept. Yeah. And they're used a lot in the original film, and then they're used extensively in this one as well.
Yeah.
And I did appreciate that they took special attention to the fact that he uses shadows, that he exists in shadows.
It was kind of interesting, too, because they avoided the mirrors.
Yeah.
They do use mirrors in this movie, but not for the traditional vampire reasons. Like, he doesn't ever show up as not there in a mirror.
Yeah.
But in the beginning of the movie, and this isn't a spoiler, he comes in to this room, and he comes in through the window, and these curtains are kind of flowing in the wind, and every time they go forward, you can see his shadow on it, but when it goes away, you don't see him at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very interesting. It was very cool. Like, visually, it was pretty stimulating.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to see their contrast and their visual interpretation of a vampire rather than just relying on his non-existence in the mirror.
Yeah. I mean, also, too, like, as a depiction of something like depression or whatever, or just something that takes over you, like, mentally and emotionally completely, that was very much like the shadow concept, I think, plays into that nicely.
Right.
They also had the shadow going up the stairs scene, which is the classic. That's the most iconic image from the whole movie. The original is when he creeps up the stairs and it's just his shadow, and then he opens the door. And this one, they had it, and the music for that part was perfect.
That's fair.
Just perfect. And they did it very differently. But again, I think I initially was like, oh, you're doing this shot differently. And then I was like, you should do it differently. You're
Sure.
a new movie, and you've proven yourself to be very capable with this material.
Yeah.
So this is so now I almost want to go back and rewatch that mesmerizing shot because I want to just take it in for the way that they intended it, and so that was a really cool one as well.
Yeah, that's fair. And then we already mentioned this one. I was just going to go over the carriage scene, but we already talked about that one visually because it is extremely stimulating. But it is like that probably is the most iconic shot of the film. Like
the new one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Despite my preference for the hand shadow, this one it's breathtaking. I don't even know. Like, there's plenty of cinematographers that do a great job throughout a whole movie. Like the Dune cinematographer, the guy that did Batman.
Yeah.
The guy that did Revenant. Like, these are guys that will visually increase the value of your film.
Yeah.
This shot alone increased the value of the film by itself. It's so stunning and stimulating that everybody in that theater was quiet when it was happening.
Yeah, because there's no noise in that.
Everyone recognized the impact that scene was having.
Yeah, we were all just...
Yeah, it's mesmerizing. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. Even if you don't watch anything else in the movie, like that scene itself is impressive.
Yeah, which begs the question. It's like, it's kind of worth going in the theaters so you can see it on that big screen.
Unless you've got a giant screen at home, but
yeah,
not a lot of us do.
Yeah, this movie, this is like, maybe I'm speaking too soon, but I feel like this is like Greg Toland levels of cinematography achievements. Like, it's a cinematographer achievement. Like this movie, the framing.
It'll be nominated, if not win, for this year for sure.
Yeah, like you're going back to like the mirrors. There's one where it's like this circular rotation. Then William Dafoe like goes up to the window and he has his back to us, but he's reflected in the mirror so we can see his face and the sunlight on it at the same time. And it was like,
yeah,
geez, that one was great.
The guy flexed a lot in the movie.
Yeah, constantly. But it was just like, it's like I can't say enough about just like that entire like total immersion into it. I mean,
it's
this is
extremely visually stimulating.
Yeah.
Another shot that I thought it's less innovative, I suppose, but it's impactful on a gothic level, and then for the source material is very reminiscent of both properties, Dracula and Nosferatu. But it's when Thomas arrives at the castle and Nosferatu's there. He does a fantastic job of keeping Nosferatu's face cowled, without having like a cowl. And it's very dark, and he's following him around these stairs and such. And then they go into this room with this giant blazing fire.
Yeah.
And he's standing in front of it, and the contrast with the shadows on his face and the giant fire behind him was like, this is quintessential visual storytelling in a gothic masterpiece.
Yep.
Like this, they did a perfect job. And like, it's visually, there's not much else to say. Like, it is incredibly done.
That scene in particular was a moment where the movie had a choice and it started to deviate from what it ends up being and instead go into this almost playful territory, I felt.
Yeah, it almost went into the Bela Lugosi thing.
Yeah, a little bit.
Stay forever. Like, it's, oh boy. All right.
Yeah, and I was like, I just had a smile on my face throughout that whole sequence because
it was great.
Yeah, it was so, it was, I guess, classical vampire,
Extremely.
like what you mean. Yeah, and I think that was a version of Nosferatu that we didn't quite get, but we get it for that one moment. Just because it's like you can only make this so heavy.
Sure.
And instead he kind of scaled back for a moment and was like, I remember the kind of goofy iterations.
Yeah.
That
he was nodding to the fans of those for sure.
Yeah.
He's like, I see you guys.
Yeah. So we got at least a moment in there.
Right.
He still wanted his artistic master. And it's not that it doesn't work in the broader context. It does. It's just that because there's a lack of music and because he shoots that scene fairly straightforward in terms of like you can follow it just fine without being confused or like, twirling or, nothing. It's all very straight-laced. Because of that, it just kind of elevates the Orlok's performance, the like, and like it's, I can't even do the voice. It was so much. It worked, but it was also like enough to be a convincingly just decrepit old man.
Well, his hands too.
Yeah.
They did a lot with his hands, which is something that is very classical. But he constantly is just pointing. It's like these long fingernails and decrepit. It's great. Yeah, those bits were pretty good.
Yeah.
Appreciated those.
That's Nosferatu.
That's Nosferatu. Do you have any final points or comments before we take off?
That was something.
It was something. That's probably the best way to put this, because we got to stew on this one for a while. That was a lot. Anyway, that is the HolmFront review of Nosferatu. Thank you for joining us.